Welcome everyone. My name is Matthew Sturkey with StoneMill Log Timber Homes. Thanks to Don for putting this on today. I'm going to talk about project budgeting. Before we get started, before we go into the presentation, I wanted to take care of a couple of housekeeping items. For those of you who just logged on and didn't hear Don earlier, we are going to have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. We've got 86 guests registered for the event. There's too many for us to field questions during the presentation, and we're going to have a Q&A session afterwards. I'll stick around as long as I have to answer all your questions, and you also have your sales consultants that can reach out to you and answer any questions that you might have that don't get answered during the presentation. So with that said, we'll get started. Everybody's muted right now, so we don't pick up a bunch of background noise with as many people as we have on the event. Wanted to start just by introducing myself again. Matthew Sturkey, StoneMill Log Timber Homes. I'm the VP of Sales and Marketing here at StoneMill. StoneMill is family owned. For those of you who aren't as familiar with us, we are family owned and operated since 1974. We've done over 2,000 structures in our 46-year history. We help clients who are looking to build that vacation weekend getaway, that primary residence, rental investments. We specialize in the design, fabrication, and construction of log and timber frame homes across the United States. And I've worked in my years, I've been doing this for now about 24 years. I've worked with over 500 clients personally. So want to use these events and use this as an opportunity to share some of our experiences and some of the information. This is an educational event. It's not a sales pitch. And so our goal here is to educate you on the project budgeting steps to help you get started with that project. So with that said, the goals for the event are threefold. One, to educate you on how to prepare a project budget. It's really important for those of you who are serving as your own GC or trying to get started, trying to figure out what the next steps are. Budgeting, estimating is one of the first steps that you'll try to tackle before you get too far into the project. For those of you who are hiring a general contractor, your general contractor is going to take care of these things for you. So I want to be clear about that, because your GC is the one that you're going to procure to go through your budget, and you're going to be very specific with your general contractor. You're going to take them a set of plans, and you're going to tell them what you want to go into the house, and then their job is to go out and get a good, solid, good faith estimate for your project, a project budget. But for those of you who are serving as your own GC, this lunch and learn will probably help you more, because these are some of the steps that you'll have to tackle in the absence of a general contractor. Second thing we want to try to cover is the items that are associated with a comprehensive project budget. So we're going to be using some spreadsheets that general contractors use, that lending institutions provide along the way to help you with your project budget, so that when you come to them, you've got a comprehensive, good faith number that captures all the line items needed in a comprehensive project budget. And then the third is going to be, what's next from here? How do you move forward? What's your next step? And it's going to be different for everybody. There are some of you that will own land, some of you that don't own land, and some of you that are a little farther ahead. We've got some of our clients that are on here, and they are, certainly a lot, many more steps up the ladder than others who haven't even started the design process. So hopefully everybody that's here gets a little bit of information out of it. Hopefully it's helpful for you. And if you have any questions, like I said, we'll wait until the end to address those. So with that said, we're going to start with our outline. And I want to make sure that when you're starting your project budget, that we're clear about what your budget includes, because we work with prospective clients that don't own property, that haven't made improvements to the property who do own land. And for those of you who already own land, have already made the improvements, now you're dealing with project budgeting specific for the build. And I want to be clear about that, because your project budget, typically when you're budgeting for construction, it is not going to include things like land, septic, well, driveway, power. You're going to have those things regardless of whether you build a custom log or timber frame home, or whether you put a fifth wheel on the property, or whether you put a double wide on the property. You're going to have the cost of the land, and you're going to have the cost of the improvements no matter what, because you've got to get a driveway to your site where your structure is going to be. You got to get power there. You've got to get water there, septic system, and you've got to do landscaping. So those are typically, when you start talking about budgeting, you typically are going to separate those items, because those are land and infrastructure costs associated with getting your site ready to build a structure. So hopefully that makes sense. Your three buckets, as I call them, are going to be your land bucket, which is going to include any type of survey cost or soil testing or closing cost. Sometimes people will just put the cost of the land in there, and then they don't have some of those other soft costs in there associated with getting the property, like getting a survey to know where your property lines are, or getting the closing costs in there from your financing, or getting a soil test done to see how many bedrooms you can actually build on the property before you purchase it. The second bucket, so to speak, is that land improvement bucket. And that one's a tough one, because it's going to vary with every site. You know, a driveway is going to be a different cost. Some may have to go 100 feet, 150 feet, and then we've had sites where literally the driveway's been a mile long to get back to the construction site, to the building site. Some people are going to have city water, or they're going to have sewer, where others are going to have to drill a well, and they're going to have to do a septic system. So those land improvement costs are going to be variable costs from one site to the next, and you want to make sure that you capture those separately, because typically general contractors are going to give you a budget, or going to give you a good faith estimate on the cost to build the structure, unless you're specific with them about putting a driveway in, about putting a septic system in, about drilling a well, about getting power to the site. You want to make sure that you're specific with them about doing those infrastructure things, so that they include that in their scope. And then the final bucket, so to speak, is the construction of the home. And we're talking about log or timber frame construction here. If you're here and you're not interested in building a log or timber frame home, I apologize, you've come to the wrong place, but you're welcome to stick around. So before we start talking about specific budget items, I want to talk about some tips that are really important before you get started with budgeting. And the first one, which can't be understated enough, is to be specific. Make sure that you're developing a set of plans that is specific to your site, and that is specific to the finishes that you want to put into your home. Don't use a floor plan. Don't use ballparks. Don't use guesstimates or allowances to determine a good faith estimate. When you're trying to get an accurate project budget, you want to make sure that your plans are specific to your site and to your grade elevations, so that you can get accurate foundation cost. And you want to make sure that you've given your GC or your subs who are going to be providing estimates for you the specifics on what you want. And so that first tip is be specific. Make sure you know exactly what you want to put into that project, so that when you send those requests for bids out to the subcontractors or give it to your GC, he is very clear on what you want to go in the home. The second one is be organized. Develop a spreadsheet. Use spreadsheets or estimating software that's available. Some of the spreadsheets that we provide to our prospective clients come from lending institutions. The lending institution that you're going to work with might have a spreadsheet. If you're hiring a GC, they're going to have a spreadsheet to use. There are other resources and tools online that you can use to develop a spreadsheet for a project budget. So make sure that you are organized. Don't just get all your numbers in and write them down on a piece of paper. Make sure you have a spreadsheet to be able to plug those into. And as I said before, if you missed it, we're going to share some of the spreadsheets that we provide to prospective clients that come from some of the lending institutions that we work with for you guys with this presentation early next week. So don't feel like you have to write everything down. All this information is going to be provided to you. Third tip is going to be obtain accurate written estimates. And when I say written, that is so that you can look at the scope of what they are estimating. And, you know, it doesn't matter if it's in an email form or if it's in a formal proposal form. Just make sure that you don't take a verbal number so that when you're going and getting started with your project, you have something to refer back to. If you get an estimate from an electrician, you can go back and see that, okay, he estimated the labor only for the rough in and trim out of the electrical fixtures, but he doesn't have anything in there for the actual electrical fixtures. So I've got to get a number for those fixtures for him to do the installation. So your written estimates allow you to have something on paper that show price and scope. And then they might show some conditions or some qualifications about exactly what they've estimated. So don't use ballparks. I know it's easier to use ballparks. It's easier to use allowances. The one thing that I would say about allowances, which, you know, certainly if that's the way you want to put together a number, you're fine. But when you go to select these items, at that point, if you're going to stay within budget and you're going to stay on track with your project budget, you're going to have to be very diligent about sticking to the number that you put in there. I mean, I've seen clients that have had allowances put in for electrical fixtures of 9 or 10 grand, and then they go to pick a fixture and they pick one fixture that's $1,500, and now they've got to get the rest of those fixtures in a $7,500 budget. So make sure that you're not using allowances if you can help it. Get written estimates from professionals and get comparative estimates if you want to. I mean, a lot of GCs who are used to doing this have multiple subs with each line item. They may have 2 or 3 different plumbers that they'll send a project bid request out to. They'll get 2 or 3 numbers per line item, and then they'll use the number that they feel is most appropriate for that project. It's not always using the lowest number. Sometimes they'll use a number that is best appropriate or most appropriate for that particular project, for a particular sub. The next tip is to account for market fluctuations. This is really important because we're dealing with this as we speak. COVID, supply and demand issues, market fluctuations in material and labor cost. If you do an estimate today, that estimate will probably not be the same when we start hitting the build season in the spring. And so you want to make sure that you keep up with those things. Make sure that you account for market fluctuations, account for things like changes to scope. Go back and update your project budget if anything changes along the way, and you need to go back and reflect that in your budget. And also making sure that you account for any unforeseen costs like hitting rock during foundation construction. That is a big unknown. There's really no way to know exactly what that number is going to be, but you might put a 10% allowance in there or a 20% allowance in that particular line item to cover the event that you might hit rock. Or with a well, that's the other tricky part is when you're drilling a well, there's really no way to know how far you're going to go down to hit water. There are certainly ways to get good guesstimates based on the topography and based on other homeowners in the area, how far they've gone, but there's no guarantee. So make sure you cover yourself in the event that you estimate for a 400-foot well and you end up having to go 500 or 600 feet to hit water. So a couple of points below, one, we talked about using historical data, meaning go back the last 3 years and look at what the average increase for construction cost was, and then apply that to you. So if you're not building this year or you're building in 2 or 3 years, you certainly don't want to use numbers from today as what your costs are going to be in 3 years. So make sure you put some of those inflationary costs, some of that historical data, and apply that to your budget. So when when it comes time for you to build, that project budget has taken those things into account. Um, I put a little stat in here. This is basically comes from an online source, and then I put a couple of links. Forecasting residential inflation next 3 years. I saw percentages that ranged from 3.8% all the way to 4.9%. Now, again, this is taking into account just average historical data over a 3-year period of time, and it doesn't always take into account abnormal anomaly situations like a pandemic or a natural disaster or something that might have a huge spike or a huge fluctuation on the lumber market or the framing lumber market or steel. So those things aren't taken into consideration in that. So hopefully those links will be helpful to you. You can read a little information. The NAHB website is a great place to go to gather information about construction cost and to see what kind of historical data and how much cost have changed over the last couple of years. So when you're doing these project budgets, you got to be very vigilant. You got to be very disciplined. You got to be very organized. And so for the owner builders that we work with, which is a bunch, we deal with about 50% owner builders in our business. And so we're trying to prepare you guys for, making sure that you get a good budget in place that you can work with. Because when you go over to a lending institution, and typically every lending institution is different, but a lending institution will typically want a full set of drawings, and they're going to want a full-blown good faith estimate. And a lot of lending institutions will want a general contractor involved, but for any lending institution that does not require that, they're going to still want those two main ingredients. They're going to want a for-construction set of plans, and they're going to want a comprehensive good faith estimate. So hopefully this helps to get you kind of preparing that correctly. And then the last tip is just to understand the difference between hard cost and soft cost. And what I mean by hard cost is things that that are hard numbers, like roofing material, flooring material, plumbing, electrical, cabinetry, countertops. Soft costs are going to be things that are somewhat not typical in a normal budget, that are there that you have to account for, but things that don't always enter that conversation all the time, like closing cost from the property, or insurance, getting builder's risk insurance for your project to cover your materials on site, or permitting cost, or silt fencing costs, and some of these things that are necessary to an accurate project budget, but not always the things that you think of or prepare for, that kind of are miscellaneous items that sometimes fly under the radar that do add up. And so make sure you account for those and you understand the difference between those. So this basically gets us through our outline and through our initial tips on getting started. And what I want to talk about now is basically the items specifically that are going to go into a project budget. And these items are certainly not complete. We're going to go through 12 main titles or topics, so to speak. And if you need a complete comprehensive list, again, that is something that your general contractor will provide when he's doing a good faith estimate for you. If you're an owner builder, your lending institution will have a spreadsheet that you can use, or there are spreadsheets available online. There's estimating software available online. And again, we're going to provide the spreadsheets that we typically provide in our design process as one of our deliverables when somebody goes into our design queue and we do a preliminary design for estimating. We provide these spreadsheets as well. And they're just simple, comprehensive spreadsheets that start with preliminary cost, capturing things like surveying and permitting and builder's risk insurance and connections and impact fees. There are certain fees in development, so to speak. If you're building in a development, there are sometimes impact fees that you have to pay to the development, to the homeowners association, to be able to tap into some of their utilities, to a community septic system or a community well. You have to pay certain impact fees, or design and engineering costs. That's one point I want to mention is when we work with clients, and when a prospective client starts with us, all of the design and engineering costs to stamp and seal that set of plans, that for construction set of plans, that is all provided in our scope, in our offering. So make sure that if you're putting a number in designing and engineering, and in our case, we provide that in our scope for our material and labor package, that you remove that out of your project budget in a preliminary cost item so that you're not doubling up. Because the goal in this whole exercise is to make sure you have each line item accounted for and that you're not missing something or you're not doubling up something. So it's really important, as I said before, to make sure you have written estimates so you can compare scope, because you might get 3 different plumbing bids and those plumbers don't have the exact same scope. And you want to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples in that situation. The next item is going to be site prep and excavation. That's basically once you've gotten the road in and you've gotten utilities in, you're doing cleanup, you're doing tree removal, you're doing erosion control, you're doing rough grading, you're doing excavating for footings and retaining walls and porch piers and foundation work. You're getting the site excavated and ready and prepared for that building project, for that structure itself, because that's what we're talking about when we talk about project budgeting, is for the building of the structure itself. Next item is foundation and concrete work, which will vary from client to client. Some clients are going to use a poured wall foundation. Some are going to use block because they might be doing a crawl space. Some may be doing a slab on block. And then others might be doing a precast, foundation wall system like a Superior wall system or a Van Hoosko system, which are precast, or an ICF, which is an insulated core form. So there's no standard, number that you can apply here, because it's going to be site specific. It's going to vary with each project site and each homeowner. For a homeowner that's got a moderate to steep site, you're probably going to be on a lower level. It might be a walkout basement or a daylight basement, whereas somebody on a level site is probably more likely to do a short crawl space or a slab, just depending on where you are in the country. So foundation concrete work. Make sure also when you're talking about concrete work, you figure in your slab cost. And something that you want to consider too is like any sidewalk, any flat work for landscaping or sidewalks, because that's the other thing too, is landscaping is not something that you typically put into an initial project budget on a structure, because landscaping is going to be very site specific and very client specific. So make sure you keep your landscaping costs separated into that second bucket with your infrastructure costs, because that is such a variable with each client and with each site. But you do want to calculate and capture some of your concrete work for like sidewalks from your driveway and those types of things. The next item is subfloor and porch deck. So typically, before our crews arrive to do log and timber frame work, a homeowner is going to have site prepared, excavation done, foundation done, concrete work done. They're going to have subfloor in and porch decks. And basically this is your porch floor. So when you're talking about subfloor, there's some variables here as well. You're going to have different subfloor applications like web trusses, or you might have a truss joist engineer or an I-beam. It's a wood I-beam, or you might have just conventional 2x material. With porch decks, you might have pressure treated framing with a 5/4 deck board on top of that porch deck, or you might do Trex, or you may do a perimeter stem wall with basically a flagstone floor, or with a slab. So there's a lot of different applications that go into capturing, but just make sure you do capture your subfloor system and your porch decks. And then we're onto the log and timber log, and I put log or timber frame package because you're typically going to do one or the other. And this is important to make sure when you're getting our number, we're going to give you a specific scope. We're going to give you a specific list of what materials we're including, and we're going to give you a specific list of what labor services we're calculating. And I'm not going to go into those because your sales consultant can get into that. And all I would say is just like you having a very clear and concise conversation with a GC. If you're an owner builder, you want to have very clear and concise conversations with our sales consultants or with your foundation contractor about exactly what you want in that scope. Talking specifically about the log or timber frame package, you want to make sure that you're specific about what items you want us to include in the quote. There's certain labor services that we provide as a standard, and then we let the general contractor or the local subs take over from there. But make sure that you have those conversations with your sales consultant to make sure you understand exactly what estimate we're providing for what material and scope we're providing. So that's log or timber frame package, and then windows and doors and finished exterior siding and roofing. And the reason I kind of lump these together is once you get that shell structure up, whether it's a log shell with the walls and the second floor structure and the timber roof and the timber porch, what we call porch racks, which is above your decks, we typically will get that what we call dried in, where your roof is to finished underlayment and then your porches are to finished underlayment, and get you what we call a dried in shell. At that point, then you've got things like finished roofing, windows and doors, which we can supply windows and doors. We're a pellet distributor. And then you've got finished exterior siding, which is in areas like the gable ends and the dormers. So if you have those little doghouse dormers in the front, you're going to have to put a finish on those. If you have gable ends above the log walls, you're going to have a finish for those. If you have a shed dormer in the back that is giving you headroom for a loft area or for an area of a second floor in a story and a half design, you're going to have a finished wall treatment that's going to go on those areas. So you want to make sure you capture that, both material and labor. And that's another thing I want to mention too, is that when you're going through and doing these project budgets, make sure you're capturing both material and labor, because you'll get estimates from certain suppliers and they're giving you material only estimates, and you've got to go get a labor price for the installation of those items. Specifically on like electrical, your electrician is going to provide you with a labor estimate on electrical rough in and trim out, but you've got to put in a number for the fixtures that you want him to install, unless you're saying to him, hey, these are the fixtures I want you to provide, and I want you to do turnkey electrical, where you not only do all the labor but you also supply the material. That doesn't typically happen. Electricians will say, hey, go to this supply shop, go to this Stokes Lighting, or go to this supplier and pick out all those things that you want, and then they'll give you a price on the labor for rough in and trim out of those fixtures. So hopefully that makes some sense. But windows and doors, finished roofing, finished siding are all going to be decisions that you'll make during the design and estimating phase, so that you can get a very specific number, because you don't want to go out and get a number on shingles and then decide you're going to do a standing seam metal roof when it comes time to build. That will not fit your budget. You would probably rather budget for a standing seam metal roof and then go to shingles, as opposed to the other way, because a standing seam metal roof will certainly be more expensive than a shingle roof. So make sure that you're very specific about what you're putting into your good faith estimate to your budget. All right, last 6 items. And again, we're just following one of our spreadsheets and we're just kind of boiling them into 12 items. Fireplaces, fireplace, and foundation finish. So this is another big variable. There are so many different areas where you can value engineer when it comes to budgeting. For example, fireplaces. There are wood stoves. There are full masonry fireboxes. There are precast, prefabricated masonry fireboxes like Isokern is a particular product that is a precast product. There are metal inserts, and all of these different directions are going to have a very different price. A full masonry fireplace, a full masonry firebox, and chimney and flue is certainly going to be a higher cost than doing a metal insert with a metal flue, with a framed chimney box around it, with a siding finish or a stucco finish. I mean, there are just so many things that you can get into um, when it comes to things like fireplaces and roofing that will vary the cost of your project budget. So make sure, again, and I'm sorry I keep saying it, be specific. Know what you want. Design your plan specifically to your site and to what you want so that you're getting accurate numbers. Because when you're getting fireplace costs, you also have to get the finish costs. A lot of people that are building log or timber frame homes want finished stone, a cultured stone on the outside of the fireplace, and they also want that to match on the foundation walls. You know, if you've got a basement foundation with a walkout basement wall that's 12 feet out of the ground and your side walls taper from the front to back from 2 feet to 12 feet, you're going to have a lot of stone that's got to be factored into that estimate to cover those foundation walls. So there are other ways. Talk to us, talk to your sales consultant, talk to your general contractor about things that you can do to value engineer. If you need to cut some costs out of your stone budget, you can do stone on the side walls, on the front wall, and then when you return to the back wall of that walkout basement, you could potentially do a board and batten, or you could do other finishes like a stucco finish. There's nothing wrong with a stucco finish, and you're looking at a huge cost difference between natural or cultured stone and a stucco finish. Moving on to kind of the rough-in phase, what I call rough-in, which is rough-in framing. This is framing all your interior conventionally built partition walls, your 2x4, 2x6 walls that separate bedrooms and baths and closets, your 2x6 walls for plumbing walls, and then you've got your rough-in framing to accommodate your mechanical, your plumbing, and your electrical rough-in that goes along with that structure. The next one would be, once you get rough-in done, rough-in framing, mechanical, plumbing, electrical rough-in, then you've got to start thinking about estimating for wall insulations. You know, when you're doing a log home, the log walls are going to provide the natural insulation for those walls, but you have framed gable ends and gable dormers and shed dormers that have to be insulated. You know, when we're doing a timber roof, we've got roof insulation calculated, what we call structural insulation panels above that timber roof. But if you're building a log home with log walls and you're conventionally framing the roof, then you've got to have roof insulation in there. You've got to have insulation for your basement walls if you're doing a basement foundation, or your subfloor if you're doing a crawl space, or insulation for your perimeter walls of a crawl space if you're doing an encapsulated crawl space. So make sure that you seek out an insulation contractor, and then be specific about the areas that need estimates on insulation. And then your wall finishes. This is where you can get into, on the interior, you can get into costs from drywall finishes all the way to T&G finishes, to barnwood, to a multitude of different things that will all have a pretty dramatic cost difference associated with them, and have a huge effect on your overall project budget. And again, these are things that you want to talk to your subs about, you want to talk to your sales consultant about, you want to talk to your general contractor about, so that you know those specific numbers can be accommodated for in your project budget. Next item is floor coverings, finished millwork, fixtures. That's things like, you know, tile for the bathrooms, wood for the great room and kitchen and dining room area, carpet for the bedrooms or whatever you choose to do. Finished millwork is going to be things like baseboard trim, window and door trim for the interior and the exterior, crown. Trim is one of those things in a log or timber frame home where you've just got to be very specific about what areas you want to have trimmed out and what wood species you want and what grades you want. And then fixtures are going to be things like plumbing fixtures for bathrooms and electrical fixtures for wall sconces and overhead ceiling fans with light kits. And mechanical would be vent covers, making sure that you got vent covers calculated into your budget and not just rough end mechanical, but you got to cover those registers with something on the floor. And then second to last is going to be cabinets, countertops, appliances, finished hardware. This is pretty straightforward. If you want to get specific numbers, there are, especially in the Knoxville market and really in some of your mid-level, mid-sized to major markets, you're going to have companies like Kitchen Sales in the Knoxville market that specialize in kitchen design, bathroom design, where they can provide your cabinets, your countertops, your appliances, all in a whole package, as well as your finished hardware, your pulls and your knobs that go on your drawers and go on your cabinet doors. If you want to go to a place like that and get a turnkey bid on your kitchen design, they also will help you design your kitchen layout or your bathroom layout. And then you can work with our designers, and that drawing that they provide you or that detail that they provide you can go into our drawing, kind of like a supplemental drawing, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So rather than going out to a separate cabinet supplier or to a separate countertop supplier, although you're more than welcome to do that, you can go to some of these places that do it all, that do more of a turnkey kitchen and bath solution. And then last is, and certainly I won't say it's not least, but there are some things that a lot of times people overlook. One is waste removal. During construction, you're going to have periods of time where waste removal has to be taken in consideration. And it varies all over the country, but to put a 6-yard or a 40-yard dumpster on the site and have it dumped every quarter or every 2 months or something, there's a cost to that. There's a cost to a porta-john, making sure that you get a porta-john on site so that your subs have a place to use the restroom, as opposed to having to drive 10 miles down the road. We build a lot of log or timber frame homes in rural areas, and you don't want the crew having to go 15 miles just to use the restroom. And so having a porta-john, there's a monthly cost to that. You can get set up on a contract, a 12-month or a 6-month contract with a porta-john supplier. They can come out, they'll come out and clean it, but there's a cost to that. Make sure you factor things like that in, and waste removal specifically. And then, obviously we're not gonna start talking about landscaping, because we've seen clients that literally have put sod down and put some simple plants and shrubs in, all the way to clients that have spent money on landscaping budgets that just blow your mind. And so everybody's a little bit different. That's the reason you don't typically put landscaping in the structure budget, because those are such subjective things when it comes to each homeowner and each site and how much landscaping is going to be required. So these are the main, and when I say 12 items, there's many more than 12 items. I've just put them together into kind of sections so that hopefully it was a little bit easier to understand. You're going to see in the spreadsheets that we provide you, there'll be one that came from one of the log home magazines years ago that we've kept up with, that we send to prospective clients. And then there's another one from a lending institution that we partner with that has these line items broken out into line by line. So my list of 12 items will become a list of 75 to 100. So just don't be overwhelmed. Please don't be overwhelmed. And then final comments, as I said before, and I can't say it enough, don't use ballparks. Ballparks are subjective and they can get you into trouble. be accurate and specific. Identify the scope that you want estimated with each of the subs or with your general contractor. Be specific on your plans. Have a plan to go out and get estimates from that shows the specific finishes that you want on your foundation or on your gable end walls or your shed dormers or your gable dormers, so that when somebody's estimating, you can submit that to them and say, hey, the plans are accurate. This is what I want you to estimate. And they can use the plans as a very accurate tool to get you a good, solid, good faith number, as opposed to having to qualify everything. You send them a floor plan and you have to tell them everything that you want them to remember. That's usually not going to go well when they're providing you with a written estimate. Also, something not on here that I want to mention, be patient. Start planning early. And I say this a lot in our Tip Tuesdays and in a lot of our presentations, but don't procrastinate. Don't wait till the last minute. Contractors, general contractors, subcontractors, if they're any good right now, are super busy. We are super busy. And so make sure that you provide enough time to get these written estimates, because you send requests for bid to a general contractor, it's going to take some time. You send a request for bid to an electrician who's out there working 10 hours a day pulling wiring in a new house. The last thing he wants to do is come home after dinner at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock and do a 2-hour estimate. Just be patient with them, because a lot of your GCs and a lot of your subs that are any good, everybody's super busy right now. So just be patient with that. Understand your variable cost. Understand your market fluctuations and your site cost and your finishes, and make sure that you have identified those specific items that you want. And then last and certainly not least, develop a specific plan to your site. Develop a specific plan to your finishes, what types of finishes you want on the interior, what kind of wall treatments you want, the flooring that you want to go in the great room and the bedrooms and the bathrooms, so that when you're doing this project budgeting, you're getting good, accurate estimates, and you've got an accurate scope, and then you've got an accurate number. It's not just some spitballed number, some guesstimate that you've come up with from talking about cost per square foot, which is hard to do. And a lot of times people want to just use ranges, or they want to use ballparks as a way to make decisions. That's just unfortunately, sometimes not the best way to make decisions. Be vigilant, be diligent, be organized, be specific about your project budgeting, and it will set you up to succeed with your project on the front end, all the way through the project. You can follow that budget. You can make adjustments along the way. You can account for market fluctuations. You can account for scope changes, or things that may have come up along the way that you've changed your mind on. You won the lottery and now you want to put standing seam metal roofing on instead of the shingles. Whatever the case may be, keep up with it. Be organized, be vigilant. And so hopefully this has been helpful. We've gone 45 minutes strong where I have not shut up, and it's now time for me to shut up and you to ask your questions. And I hope this has been helpful. So fire away with the questions.
Okay, Matthew, we have a question from Lori. She wanted to know, if they sign an estimate, can the price change during the building process?
Great question. And the answer to that is yes. You're seeing that especially right now. Take, for example, framing lumber. If you had gotten an estimate on framing lumber 6 months ago, that estimate today would be very different. The cost of sheathing, cost of OSB is at $29, $30, $31 a sheet, depending on what thickness of sheathing you're doing. I mean, it used to be $18, $19, $20 a sheet, and you're seeing a huge market fluctuation. And that's the reason I say that. Like, if you were to do an estimate today on all your interior framing and all your subfloor framing, all your porch deck framing, you're going to be getting a number that is that's pretty high. And I can't certainly guarantee that that number is going to come down, but you might see by the time that it comes to you start doing construction, that number comes down a bit. And so you pick up some money in that budget, in that particular line item, that you can either use as a contingency in the end if something unexpected comes up, or you can apply it to another line item. And that's the other thing too, is you got this, long list of budget items for, 75 or 100 line items. Not every line item is going to be exact. You might pick up a little bit of money in one line item and use it in another, or you might have a shortage in one where you need to use some additional money in another one towards that line item. So it's a constant moving around of numbers. That's why you have to be very organized and very vigilant. So yes, the numbers will fluctuate from season to season and certainly from year to year. That's why we say take into account historical data, what increases, inflationary increases will do, so that your bid that you got this year for a build project next year has a little bit of contingency factored into it. And last thing is, lending institutions will sometimes tell you to put 5 to 10% contingency in a bid. That becomes sometimes normal practice.
And Matthew, we have another question about cost. Has the increase in cost for lumber carried over to the large timbers used in timber frames?
It has. It has unfortunately caught up with us, and we're seeing that has been the case in different wood species. Specifically with cypress, we do some cypress on projects for a local development, and we've seen a pretty dramatic increase, not only from issues related to COVID, but also time of the year. And some of these mills will start to deplete, or their supply will deplete some. Well, the demand has not gone down relative to the supply. The demand's actually gone up. And when your supply goes down and your demand goes up, you've got a recipe for price increases, for timbers and material going up pretty significantly. So we haven't seen, we've definitely seen increases in all the other wood species, but it hasn't been as dramatic as the cypress market, for example. So it's really important that when we're doing estimates on our scope, we're doing estimates on our log and timber structure, that we're using current numbers, because we hope that the market will soften up a little bit. Tongue and groove prices from the summer to now have been all over the place. They've fluctuated a lot. And so one of the things that that we got to take into consideration is when you're building. I mean, if you're building in 2 years or 3 years, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put a number together now, unless you just want to start working on it. Just make sure you put some of that historical data on it, so that you can account for increases in cost over the next 3 years.
Okay, Matthew, I've got another question here. Does an open floor plan cost more in labor and materials than having multiple rooms? And does having more windows cost more than having more logs or having less windows?
Well, that's a great question. So let's take that into two parts. Open floor plan versus I will call it just a broken up floor plan with lots of interior partitions. You're going to find that an open floor plan is probably going to be slightly more cost effective, because you don't have as much interior finish wall treatment. You don't have as much interior framing. You don't have as much interior wall insulation, and you don't have as much interior wall finish like T&G finishes or drywall finishes. So certainly an open floor plan will have less finishes on your interior partitions. Maybe a little bit tougher to heat and cool because you've got an open, maybe a vaulted ceiling type area. But from a construction cost standpoint, it should be more economical because you have less finishes associated. And then that part two question, Dawn, read that part again. Sorry.
That's all right. What they're asking is, does it cost more to have more windows, or if you had less windows and more logs, what's the better
Yeah,
at the
so
cost.
that can be sometimes a trade-off. You know, if you take, for example, like the Elk River 2, and you get into the fact that the Elk River 2 has a 5 foot by 6 foot tall fixed window with two French doors on either side of it. And then it has a row of transom windows that are 5 feet wide by 3 foot tall. And then you get up into the gable end, and we've got triangular units, we've got rectangular and square fixed units. I mean, depending on the window specs, there could be $20,000 to $25,000 in just cost for the windows on just that one wall. And so you got to be careful if you're comparing a log versus a traditional window that's a 3.0 by 4.0 or a 3.0 by 5.0. I'd say it's pretty comparable. But when you get into some of these window walls and some of these glass fronts that have all these fixed units in them, or just take, for example, an accordion door, and an accordion door might be 12 feet wide. Those are expensive, and those will certainly be more expensive than a log wall at the end of the day. So I don't know if there is I think it's just going to depend on the design. It's going to depend on how much glass there is. I would say it can, on average, be a trade-off.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions here. Stacy asks, any more cost and structure through an open floor plan and support structure? Is there any more cost associated, I guess, with having an
Well, I
open?
mean, I would say take, for example, a timber frame. Timber frames can be one of the most expensive types of construction you'll build. You're basically building two houses in one, because you're building an open, self-supporting, self-sustained timber frame with ornate timbers and intricate joinery. But it does give you the flexibility for having big open designs, very open spaces, without having interior, partition walls, load-bearing partition walls. And so it gives you the ability to build these bigger open structures. I would say if you're comparing apples to apples, though, the more open the space, typically the bigger the timbers are that we're going to have to design to accommodate that space. If we're doing a great room that is 20 feet wide, the timber sizes are going to be different than if we're doing a great room that's 32 feet wide. The spacing of those rafters is going to be closer together as opposed to farther apart. We're going to have bigger member sizes. So yeah, so as you get, if you're comparing one open space to another, that span is going to certainly have an effect on the cost of that, because as you get into a bigger span, you're going to get into bigger timber sizes and header sizes and rafter sizes and post sizes to accommodate that larger area. So hopefully, does that answer the question?
Yeah. And then we have another question from Candy. She says, what is the typical build time for a log home?
I love the loaded questions. Put me on the spot. What I will say,
it's a tough one.
Yeah, what I will say is that the national average, according to the Log Homes Council, which is a part of the National Association of Home Builders, the average time frame last year was 8 to 12 months. That was from ground break to move in. Every project, what I'll say to disclaim that, though, is that every project's going to be different. It's going to be different based on the design, based on the finishes you choose, based on the slope of the property and how accessible the property is, and how much topography the property has. It's going to be based on weather, and then it's going to be based on your general contractor and his or her subs, and how well they keep up and manage those subs. I mean, we've seen we've seen owner builders build, in 4 to 6 months for smaller, easier designs on level sites, and we've seen it take people 12 to 14 to 16 months to build. So to answer your question, I would just say use the national average, the 8 to 12 month time frame, which is the same amount of time frame that it typically takes to build a custom high-end conventional home. That's the best comparison that I can give is 8 to 12 months.
Okay, we have another question. This one's about foundation.
Okay.
When using superior walls for the foundation, does it save on overall cost of foundation work, or is it more expensive due to the cost of the superior walls?
That's a great question. And I would say that you're going to spend more on foundation walls, but you're going to pick up savings because the superior wall systems and some of these precast foundation wall systems have open cavities, which means that you don't have to fur out a poured basement wall. You can insulate the cavities, and then you can put your wall finish directly over them. So you have to look at the comparison between a basement wall that's poured that you have to fur in to put a finished wall treatment on versus the additional cost of maybe a superior wall system. That might be an initial increased cost, but I think you're going to get your savings back on the fact that you don't have to fur the wall in. You can insulate directly in the cavities, and then you can put your finished wall treatment on the inside, and they're super efficient walls. You also got to figure in some time value of money. If it takes you a month longer to put a block wall in with poured cores or a poured wall system in than it does a superior wall system, because those things come in, you've already got everything excavated, you've already got the site prepared, you've already got the compacted gravel footings in. They come in literally with the precast walls. They set them in a couple of days, tie them together, pour the slab, and then you're ready for subfloor. You're talking about maybe a few days or a week versus potentially a month. There's definitely some savings that goes into the economies of scale or the efficiency of one versus the other. And it's hard to put a number on that savings, but time is definitely money. There's no question.
Okay, so this one, I think this is a good question. Cheryl asked, how do you get a crew for assembly of a log home? Do you bring in a shell crew or do you hire one locally?
Well, that's a great question.
Yeah.
It just so happens that for our company, and I'm not sure, again, how much you are familiar with us or who you're working with, and your sales consultant can certainly give you more information, but we have a separate company called Creekside Construction that specializes only in the installation of the StoneMill log or timber frame structure. Our job is to work with you and your subs or you and your GC. You would have foundation, subfloor, porch decks in, and our crew comes out and assembles the shell. We get the log walls up, we get the timber floor, the timber roof, the timber porches, get the roof to finished underlayment, and get the porches built to finished underlayment, and the gables and dormers framed and sheathed. That's what we call our dry-in. And then at that point, we turn it over to you and your GC or you and your subs, who would do all the other finish work, the roofing, the siding, the fireplace, the interior partitions. Those items are what we call the conventional items. We are a specialized subcontractor for the unique log and timber frame components, and that's what our scope will be committed to and be specific to. So great question. For us, we have that crew. We provide the material, we do all the design work, the engineering, the fabrication of the logs, and then we do all the installation with our construction company, Creekside Construction. And I honestly can't say that about other companies, and this is not an opportunity for me to downplay, but that is one of the biggest benefits to our company, is the fact that we're providing all these in-house services to make sure that we take you through that design build process and get you to a point where you can turn it over to a GC or to other local subs to do the conventional work that they're familiar with and that they do every single day.
Okay, so we have a question from Scott. Now, this may be one that we'll have to refer to one of our partnered lenders about, but he has asked if you could talk a little bit about the construction loan and conversion to a mortgage and the appraisal process. How would it work if you wanted most of the construction to be complete with some remaining interior work to be done by the owner over time? Now, I know we've run into that with having a general contractor who applies with the lender, and so they have to get approved and things like that. Do you have any input, I guess, to give him on kind of that process?
Yeah, before I do that, I want to say one thing. It is 1 o'clock. For those of you who are taking a lunch break and you got to get back to work, or you've eaten everything that you can eat in sight and you've got to go, this recording will still continue for some of these questions. So if you want to come back and listen to it once we post it to our YouTube site, you can. So don't feel like you got to stick around and that you'll miss anything. And if you do have to take off, we greatly appreciate your time. We greatly appreciate you being a part of this and learning more about, budgeting and learning more about our company and what we do. So to answer that question, I would say first, I would defer to somebody like a Jen West at US Bank that we partner with. That would be the first answer. She would be able to go through and educate you on the loan process, how that works, how appraising works, how the whole process works with log home and timber frame home financing, because US Bank has a specific section or department that does log home financing. And that's the reason we partner with people like Jen West at US Bank for financing, so that our prospective clients have a go-to source. But in short, I would say typically you can do what we call a one-time close. You basically will prepare and get all of your blueprints done for construction plans. You'll get all your good faith estimating done and a project budget done. You'll take that to your lending institution like a US Bank and like Jen West and Al Plymate, and then they'll go through the appraisal process. And that one of the things about appraising a log home is you've got to go out and you've got to find a lending institution that understands log home and timber frame home financing, because it's high-end custom construction, right? It's custom work. So you want to make sure that your appraisals are comparing apples to apples and something of like, an in-kind, something that is comparable. A custom home with natural stone on it, with a nice exterior and interior finish with the same quality of fixtures would be a good comparable. So you want to make sure that when they're appraising it, that they're appraising a like structure, a similar structure, a comparable structure. And then what I would say to your desire to do some of your interior finishes, the one thing I would tell you is that lending institutions typically don't like doing that. And they don't like doing that because there's risk involved. And anytime there's risk involved, they want to get rid of it. They want to minimize it. That's the reason that a lot of lending institutions will not do owner financing. And it's because they don't want the risk of an owner builder not being able to finish this, or not being able to get through it, or dealing with cost overruns that they weren't accounting for. So a lot of times lending institutions on a construction loan, I'll say a construction loan, they'll want to see a general contractor involved. There are exceptions. There are lending institutions that will make exceptions. And there are ways to get around that with not doing necessarily a construction loan, or doing like an equity loan, or doing another type of loan. So if you want to be an owner builder, doesn't mean you can't get financed. It just means that you may not get a construction loan. It may mean you have to just do like an equity line of credit and borrow a certain amount of money and put a certain amount of money into the project as skin in the game. Because as I said, a lending institution that's doing a construction loan, that's doing a one-time close and rolling a construction loan over to a permanent mortgage, is typically going to want a general contractor to finish it all the way to the end, and they're going to want somebody that they can hold responsible for getting it done that works in this industry. Unless you're a project manager for a commercial construction company, or you're a general contractor yourself, they typically don't like doing owner builder stuff where your day job is IT and your night job is construction. That's just not something that suits them well, and something that gives them a lot of peace of mind that it's going to get finished. So hopefully that answers your question. And like I said, I would defer, if you have specific questions about the financing process, I would call Jen West at US Bank. Your sales consultant can share her contact information with you. We've got a lending institution referral list that we can send you as well.
Okay, Matthew. So we have a question from Cheryl. She wants to know, what does dry-in mean on the home, and does that mean that you could get through the winter and then work on the rest of the home in the next building season?
So dry-in with different companies will mean something a little different. With dry-in with other companies might mean a different scope. Our definition of a dry-in, and that's the reason I want to qualify that, is by saying our definition is basically getting in a log structure, it's getting the log walls in, getting the window and door openings cut and bucked, getting the timber floor system in for the second level, getting the roof structure in if we're doing a timber roof system, or even if we're conventionally framing a conventional roof with your material, getting that roof up to finished underlayment, which is the finished titanium or the finished felt paper, for example, and then getting the porch structures built, the timber porches above your decks built up to finished underlayment on those, and those tied into the roof system, and then the gables and dormers that are above the log walls framed with the exterior sheathing in. That's what we define as our dry-in scope. Others will define that as getting windows and doors in, getting finished roofing on, getting finished siding on. And the reason that we don't typically do those things, but we can supply windows and doors through our Pella as a Pella rep, or we can provide finished siding materials that are unique, like log siding or board and batten or wavy lap siding, is because you can find local subcontractors in your area to install those things more economically. And it's better, for example, with finished roofing. You want a local installer because if you have a storm and you have damage to the roof, you want that installer to come back out and do that repair. If you have a door that needs to be adjusted, you've got a local person that can come back and make the adjustment or take care of a warranty claim in the event that something happens. So that's the reason we don't do window and door installation, and we don't do finished roofing installation or finished siding, because local subs, local installers can do that more economically and more efficiently than we can. We want to focus on the unique log and timber framework. So to be able to do a dried-in shell, yes, a dried-in shell that we get done, yeah, you can work on certain things on the interior. You would probably want to get the windows and doors roughed in, and you'd want to get the roofing material on before you start doing too much work on the interior with mechanical, plumbing, and electrical and interior framing. So those are the only other things that you would, want to kind of get wrapped up, because there are sometimes homeowners that, will build, and then the winter comes a little earlier than expected, and they don't have the ability to get, the staining done or the chinking done, and they have to wait till the next spring season when the weather warms up. But they already have, finished siding on, they already have roofing material on, and they have windows and doors roughed in and trimmed out, and they can start working on the interior a little bit by doing some interior wall framing and some electrical and plumbing rough in, and some interior, mechanical rough in, and some things like that. So yeah, getting it dried in gives you the ability to get through that winter season and get into the next spring season when it warms up a bit.
And Matthew, how far do we travel to do the dry-in erection?
Uh, we actually will go all over the continental United States. We typically will exclude, in the continental United States, we'll exclude California. It's not that we necessarily have anything against California, but California requires licensed general contractors to do installation work like that. And it's just, we don't do enough work in California to justify that. And California is really expensive. Sorry if you're from California, apologize. So we go all over the country. Certainly we're going to be doing a project in the summer that is going to be on Whidbey Island. If you know anything about Washington, right outside of Seattle is an island that you can see from Seattle called Whidbey Island. We're building a structure on Whidbey Island. So we go all over the country. Our crews, because they do a very specific scope, just limited to the log and timber portion, that allows us to be able to project ourselves from state to state all over the country and be cost effective and be competitive doing it in the process.
Okay, I have one last question, and I don't see any other ones that have really come in.
Okay.
We've covered everything else. Somebody wants to know if you know about how or when the prices of lumber is going to go back to normal. I wish we had a magic ball for that, the crystal ball.
Yeah, hang on just a second. Let me look inside that crystal ball. I have no idea. We are hoping that it will be soon. You know, this is just based on 24 years of experience. Typically, your winter months where mills tend to drop their inventory when they are suspecting that demand will go down some, so they don't have to carry as much inventory. This has been an anomaly because you've got COVID and you've got a huge demand that I don't think anybody expected or anticipated, especially in the Southeast, where we get a lot of influx of people moving into the Southeast and demand is really high. I'm hoping that in the spring, that as these mills start to increase inventory and the demand at least stays where it is, that the supply will start catching up to the demand and those costs will start to come down a bit. But that's just speculation. There's really no way to know. And you just kind of have to keep watching it. So do your due diligence. You know, really right now is a good time to estimate, because if you estimate with the market where it is and it comes down, you just put a little money in your pocket, or you might be able to put a little money towards a line item that, you know, maybe you had a shortfall in. So sorry, I can't really answer that question specifically. There's just too much of an unknown. It's like answering the cost per square foot number. It's just impossible to do.
I think that's pretty much all the questions that we have, Matthew. If anybody else has anything they want to say or any comments, let me know in the chat. I've had a couple of private messages, so I'm trying to get back with everybody privately who sent a private message. But thank you all for coming out. We've lost about half of our participants. I think everybody had to get back to work. So
yeah, and I want to thank everybody for your time, taking out you know, an hour and 15 minutes out of the middle of your day on a Friday. Thanks for your interest in our company. Please contact your sales consultant that you're working with here if you have any additional questions or need any additional information. Final reminder that we are going to be sharing this presentation, and we're going to be sharing those worksheets that I've been using along the way to go through the presentation. We're going to be sharing those with you. Please note that those are not necessarily always complete. Every site and every project is going to have some site specific and some project specific cost, but they're going to be helpful resources to get you started. We're happy to help with you along the way, so don't ever hesitate to call us. That's the reason we have in-house design, engineering, project management. We do in-house fabrication, we do in-house construction, so that we can help guide you through this process, so we can help partner with you through this process. We're not wanting to leave you out on your own to try to figure it out. So lean on us as a resource to help you through it. And I hope everybody has a great rest of their Friday. Have a great weekend, and everybody stay safe and healthy. Take care.
Everyone, have a good day.
See you later.